I'm excited to be here with you today. I have been looking forward to this episode. We both watched the Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson interview, and my first thoughts upon watching that interview was to pick up my phone, to call Mossad and say, Mossad, I found the guy who's turning everyone into anti-Semites. You need to watch this video. His name is Ben Shapiro.
Oh, Ben.
It is so funny because if you watch the video, it's very clear that Nick Fuentes did not start with any anti-Semitic beliefs at all.
Yeah.
And was completely pushed into them by extreme and incredibly immoral acts by Ben Shapiro. And if you look at Candace Owens, it appears that she also had a similar journey.
Yeah, he just keeps radicalizing people with platforms against Israel and Jews.
And what's funny is he will do this to anyone. He did this to us when we first started rising as like right-wing stars. His first intuition was to just attack us.
Yeah, I think he referred to us as something along the lines of insufferable nerds. He accused us of being nerdy.
But I take nerd as a compliment. So this means I'm at the top of the nerd hierarchy here.
Thank goodness.
But in this video, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking a deeper analysis into Nick Fuentes' views, and through that elucidate parts of American history and American identity that I think a lot of people aren't very aware of because it's been largely covered up in the school system. It makes Nick Fuentes' entire worldview, when you are aware of this, come off as a little confused, if I'm going to be honest. And we're also going to think through how you can have people with different long-term goals sort of working together in the same group. Because I think when you think through what Nick Fuentes' long-term goals are, they're very antagonistic to our long-term goals, but I think we can still work together. And he also seems like a decent guy from what I've seen.
Even for the record, we actually reached out to him hoping that he would just come on to be interviewed on this. Like, we'd rather just ask him directly about these things. Unfortunately, he didn't respond, so we're going to have to just go on. Well, Malcolm did extensive research on things he has said online publicly that are documented. So we're doing our best here, but Nick, if you ever see this, we'd love to have you on.
Yeah. And I will also say that upon hearing through this interview, what Ben Shapiro did to him when he was like a kid, right? Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire, this giant, like multi-million-dollar company, actively trying to destroy a kid's life for years, just for asking questions.
What on earth?
Reasonable to ask. I was like, okay, I can see how Nick Fuentes ended up where he is. But what's so funny is us and Nick Fuentes, and you're going to see this throughout the interview, is it's sort of like somebody comes out to us and they're like, you need to denounce Nick Fuentes. And I'd be like, why do I need to denounce Nick Fuentes? Like, at one point, Ben Shapiro got him, while he was in college, put on a no-fly list. So he couldn't even fly domestic.
Oh, that wasn't Ben Shapiro.
No, it's Ben Shapiro's organization.
Daily Wire?
Yes, the Daily Wire reached out to the Media Matters organization, and then Media Matters got him banned, put on a no-fly list.
Oh, so the Daily Wire started it. I didn't catch that.
Yeah. It's pretty much all orchestrated by the Daily Wire. Not like Ben Shapiro directly, but it seems pretty clear that he directed somebody else to do this.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's, I mean, and not being able to fly for a year, that's, especially as a media figure, that's crazy.
Denounce Nick Fuentes. And I'm like, why should I denounce Nick Fuentes? And they'd be like, well, he's an anti-Semite. And I'd be like, well, no group should really be above question. I think it's healthy in a society. Like, okay, that didn't work. He wants an autocracy. And I'm like, well, I mean, democracies do seem to be fraying at the edges right now. And I can see that it might be worth exploring new forms of government. And they're like, oh, okay. He wants to make America a Christian country. And I'm like, well, I mean, I think it was sort of founded that way, and I don't have a particular problem with it. And they scratch their head and they're just like, so you're just going to let him turn America into this Catholic? I'm like, wait, what? Put him on a no-fly list. Because the problems we have with the wider Nick Fuentes ideology are quite different than the problems that a lot of other people have. You'll note here, because I have in the past been very confused by Nick Fuentes' ideology, not understanding how he could be a Catholic integralist. These are people who want to put the entire world under a Catholic one world government. And actually, he's never claimed that he is a Catholic integralist. I couldn't find a single AI will tell you he is till you're blue in the face. But when you ask for a specific quote or citation, I can find nothing.
Well, so do you think maybe Nick Fuentes is a Catholic integralist the same way that we are eugenicists, which is to say
no, not exactly. Because he'll talk about stuff like intelligentsia, like the intelligentsia of the integralist movement, where he seems to include himself among this. So like,
well, I don't know, like we mix with people who call themselves eugenicists.
Yes, but he has never denied the term either, nor has he ever really skewered it in the way that we have gone long into skewering eugenics.
What are the benefits to him for doing so? You know, no one's accusing him of it. It's not causing him any trouble. So why would he actively?
Yeah,
and people aren't actively accusing him of it. I mean, people actively accuse us of eugenics, therefore we publicly deny because we're like, that's not true.
People accuse him of this all the time, and they accuse him of it on both the right and the left. Like there are mainstream right-wing sources that are sympathetic to him that call his position Catholic integralism.
Oh, so he would be prompted to correct.
He would be very prompted to call them out.
Okay.
The real answer is while it's not his actual intellectual position, he identifies with it enough that he doesn't mind being called it. His actual position could be better defined as Catholic. Okay, let's see. White Catholic nationalism would be the actual position. An American first, white Catholic nationalism.
Okay.
And this is and the Catholic is the largest and loudest word within this.
Catholic set the tone in America, but Vatican City doesn't run everything.
No, he hasn't thought through that far.
Oh.
So we're not getting to that yet. So he is a Catholic American nationalist.
Okay.
Now, and he sees these two identities as completely obvious, right? That if you're a good Christian American, you're going to be a Catholic American nationalist. The problem is that this perspective appears incredibly stupid if you have any knowledge of American history. America was essentially founded to be an anti-Catholic state. If you don't believe me, and I'm going to quote here from an article, How Anti-Catholicism Helped Fuel the American Revolution, we're going to go into the words of a Catholic cardinal, okay? So this is not an anti-Catholic person saying that this was the reason America was founded.
Okay.
In 1912, the English cardinal Garesca flatly declared that, quote, the American Revolution was not a movement for civil or religious liberty. Its principal cause was the bigoted rage of the American Puritan and Presbyterian ministers at the concessions of full religious liberty and equality to Catholics of French Canada, end quote.
What, the American Revolution?
The were you not taught this in school? I am shocked the number of people who don't know this. You were not taught that the American Revolution was in large part an anti-Catholic revolution.
I mean, you know, we hear more about like taxation without representation and the Stamp Act and, you know, people not liking the British government.
And I think that the school system has done a very good job of scrubbing this from history. Because
why would they? The American school system isn't exactly like, I mean, we didn't go to Catholic school. I could get like maybe if Catholic school wanted to kind of like.
I think the reason is, if you're wondering why this has largely been covered up, is American schools see the oppressed class or the class that was being rebelled against as intrinsically the good guys, right? And so it wants to uplift the oppressed class or the class that's being rebelled against. Now, in this case, the Catholics weren't really an oppressed class, but we'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
They kind of were because they were regularly arrested in the 13 colonies for being Catholic, which we'll also get to. But it was only legal in 2 of the 13 colonies, by the way.
Catholicism as a religion?
To vote as a Catholic or run for office as a Catholic.
you weren't allowed to.
Now, hold on. You might be thinking I am overstating. Oh, sorry. So
they were just like, I thought it was more like you have to have these basic requirements set, but not that things precluded you from being able to vote. Like you could vote as long as you had property and were a man.
Simone, you again, the American school system has betrayed you. The American school system has lied to you. To put that number in context for you, free blacks could vote in 10 of the 13 colonies, and Jews could vote in 4 of the 13 colonies. So in terms of the groups that our founding fathers were afraid of having influence in America, blacks, they were broadly okay with. Jews, they were slightly trepidatious about. And Catholics, they were terrified of. The American school system did this because it didn't want to have people remember that Catholics could be considered a discriminated group, because then they might be able to demand concessions.
Because we were taught about how Catholics were discriminated against, especially with the big wave of Irish immigration that happened much later.
Right. But the reason why we talk about the discrimination of the Irish wave is because it was significantly less reactionary than it being the motive for America to become an independent nation. And if you want to go into our founding fathers, what did they think, right, of Catholics? Because you can't, they couldn't have really been that anti-Catholic. John Adams, this is a quote from him in a letter to Thomas Jefferson. Can a free government possibly exist with the Roman Catholic religion? Another quote from John Adams, second president. I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. If ever any congregation of men could merit eternal perdition on earth in hell, it is the company of Loyola.
Wow. What did they ever do to John Adams?
Hold on, it wasn't one guy. We'll get to why the American founders were so scared of Catholics immigrating into America in a second. Okay?
Yes, please.
Let's go to Samuel Adams. You might have heard of Samuel Adams, signer of the Declaration, revolutionary leader.
Beer brand.
I did verily believe that popery was a religion destructive to all others, end quote. Letter to John Scully. Quote, much more is to be dreaded from the growth of popery in America than from the Stamp Act or any other act destructive of civil rights, end quote. Boston Gazette, 1768. So
okay,
he said
they also cared about the Stamp Act, okay?
No.
Also,
no,
but
what
like,
did he
come
say?
on, England
What did he say,
was
Simone? Listen to his words, okay? He cared about the Stamp Act, but what he said here was, much more is to be dreaded from the growth of popery in America than from any of these other acts that you were taught about.
So just let me be clear about this. They were uncomfortable with the fact that the British government, which itself is independent from the Catholic Church, simply allowed for religious freedom, including that of Catholics.
In Canada. Yes.
In Canada. Yes. Which it also governed.
Specifically, one of the things that led to this, and we'll get to it in a bit, was the legalization of Catholicism as a religion and giving them equal rights to other people. The literally, I kid you not, the founding fathers would be more terrified that there have been a Catholic president than a Black president. No, because they saw Black people and slavery as like often this like more complicated institution that needed to eventually be addressed. They saw Catholicism as antithetical to everything that they viewed.
Well, they probably would have seen like a Black presidency as being inevitable, given the number of men who have kids with Black women in even the early American days. So yeah, they'd be like, well, of course. I mean, we're producing a lot of Americans.
Another one here, Samuel Adams told a group of Mohawk Indians that the law, referring to the Quebec law, to establish the religion of the Pope in Canada would mean that, quote, some of your children may be induced, instead of worshiping the only true God, to pay his dues to images made with their own hands, end quote. Okay, now people are like, well, you know, I'm a Thomas Jefferson guy myself. So even if these other guys, hold on.
Okay.
History, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil government. And then in another quote from him, in every country and every age, the priest has been hostile to liberty. They have perverted the purest religion ever preached to man into mystery and jargon. And now note here, a lot of like atheists have taken these to try to mean like he was talking about all religion. But if you look at the second quote here, it's very clear that he's using priest as euphemism for the Catholic priesthood, because he's talking about it being perverted into mystery and jargon. And then he says the purest religion ever, inciting that the religion is accurate. It's Catholicism which has corrupted it, right? And what I find really interesting about Nick Fuentes' positions is that they were so accurately predicted by the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers said, this is why Catholicism is going to have some trouble integrating with an American identity because it will lead people to want a more autocratic state, to want to restrict the freedoms of the citizens, which are both things that Nick Fuentes desires. But through desiring them, what he shows is there is nothing American nationalist about his position. It is a position that is in many ways antithetical to any form of American identity that we had within our history. And this is why it's so important to bring this up. He's trying to reflect, like, let's go back to a better, purer America, when the America of history would have seen itself as being able to purify and being able to have freedom and liberty, specifically because of the absence of people with Nick Fuentes' cultural background. And they would say to him, why don't you go move to a country, because there are many Catholic majority countries, that aligns with your values. And I'm noting here, not all Catholics have these values, but there is a reason why these values, in the eyes of the American founding fathers and in the eyes of Catholics like Nick Fuentes, are correlated, specifically Catholicism and autocracy and a restriction of individual freedoms. And where I might even agree with Nick Fuentes is that if America was a Catholic state, because when I look at Catholic democracies, they don't seem to work very well. They have really high amounts of corruption. They have really high amounts of poverty compared to Protestant democracies. I have to say, maybe Catholicism actually isn't compatible with democracy in the way that many people assumed it was. And maybe other forms of government should be experimented with within Catholic majority populations. The problem is that is both not America and antithetical to America's founding principles and the principles America has had since its foundation. And note here, I don't mean that the way a progressive means it when they say it. When a progressive means, well, it's against, America was founded to be a country of diverse individuals and a country where anyone could come. And I'm like, no. America was founded with the understanding that if you got too diverse of a cultural perspective within the country, people from cultural backgrounds and from environmental backgrounds that are more prone to autocratic structures, are more prone to wanting to restrict individual freedoms, would begin to implement those policies within this country. I'm coming at it from literally the antithetical perspective, saying America was founded to be an exclusive and not an inclusive society, and the type of person it was founded to exclude most is individuals like Nick Fuentes. But what's cool about this is, as we go through what our founding fathers thought of Catholics and Catholics who might believe they have a mandate to impose their religious rules and structure on other people through the legal system of the state, we can see what they would have thought of Muslims, for example, immigrating into the country, who believed they had a theological motivation to implement Sharia law within any location, or really any non-Protestant religious group, which is, of course, offensive and, in a weird way, an alignment with Nick Fuentes' ideology. It's just that he tries to rewrite it as a Christian country founded to keep out non-Christian values, when it was really more of an anti-Catholic country founded to keep out high church values. And note here, this is not me like being an anti-Catholic or something like that. This is me stating historical facts, i.e. the motivation of various founding fathers, combined with a literal cardinal saying, yes, these are accurate historical facts. And I would note here, if you want to be like, well, this was only way back when America was founded, that certainly wasn't a property or a belief that carried through American history, I'd point out to you that if you go to just like the 1940s and you're looking at what the KKK was up to, or I think they also had a flare-up in the 1960s, their core enemies were Catholics, blacks, and Jews, often in that order. If Nick Fuentes wants to bring back it being okay to be racist and anti-Semitic, then the third and integral part of that sort of roundup of okayness is having an anti-Catholic sentiment. Being racist and anti-Semitic in the US always went hand in hand with being anti-Catholic. He's Robespierreing it here, basically saying we need to normalize kicking out all the un-American minorities, not realizing he is one of the un-American minorities. Nick Fuentes might not have realized the can that he just popped open.
Once you pop, the fun don't People don't know that this is the other stuff he's saying on his own platform. Roll the clip.
Hey, I'm a stone cold white nationalist, and I love Hitler, and I don't want Indians here, and I'm not a Democrat, okay? And I'm not woke, and I'm not liberal.
All right. And let me preface it too, because I don't want nobody saying, Brandon, you took that out of context. I watched the entire video. He goes on the
It's like nobody warned him that if you normalize the dishes, Jews and blacks, the next dish on the menu is Catholics. He's up next.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
And then you might be like, okay. Alexander Hamilton. And so here I'm reading again from a piece on this. Alexander Hamilton decried the Quebec Act as a diabolical threat. Quote, does not your blood run cold to think of the English Parliament should pass an act for the establishment of arbitrary power and popery in such an extensive country? Your loves, your property, your religion are all at stake. And this gets me because you will often see Nick Fuentes within the interview that he did and within stuff is he will say America was founded as a Christian country, and then with a little sleight of hand and be like, and Catholicism is the only real form of Christianity, therefore America was founded as a Catholic country. And this, I think, is something he's doing because he expects his audience to not have education on the actual motivations behind the founding of America. And I will note...
he may be ignorant of it himself.
Yeah, he may be ignorant of it himself. And note here, I'm not saying that Catholicism was the only reason. I'm just saying that there is a cardinal who says it was a bigger reason than taxation without representation. And I think most people who take an honest look at history would be like, it was probably at least equal into some of the founding fathers a bigger issue. We need to get to why it was a bigger issue. But here now you might be saying like this, wait. Surely there were Catholics living in America at the time of the Revolution. And the answer is not really. There was 1.6% of the population might have been Catholic. And you're like, what about Maryland, the Catholic colony? And it's like, actually, Maryland had periods where it arrested people for being Catholic, which we will go over. And only 15% of the population of Maryland was Catholic, despite being originally founded as a Catholic safe haven. So to go on here, only 3 of the 13 colonies allowed Catholics to vote. All New England colonies except Rhode Island and the Carolinas prohibited Catholics from holding office. Virginia would have priests arrested for entering the colony. Catholic schools were banned in all states except Pennsylvania. America was basically founded where people from all over the world came together and agreed on one thing. We really don't want to live in a country with Catholics.
Won't it be nice to get to America where we don't have to worry about
Catholics
anymore? There are no
Catholics
in America. But back home in Mother Russia...
But there are no
Catholics
in America, and the streets are paved with cheese. Oh, there are no
Catholics
in America, so set your mind at ease.
Non sa la cosa terribile che esiste nella patria mia. You think things were bad in Russia? You should see things in my country.
During the lead up to the revolution, rebels seeking to stoke hatred of Great Britain routinely equated the practices of the Church of England with that of the Catholic Church. In the late 1760s and 1770s, colonists celebrated anti-Pope days, an anti-Catholic festival derived from English Guy Fawkes Day, named after a Catholic who attempted to assassinate King James I. Quote, orations, cartoons, and public hangings of effigies depicted royal ministers as in league with, alternately with the Pope and the devil, writes historian Ruth Block. So again, the point I'm making here is if anyone tells you America was founded as a Christian country and they're including Catholics in that mix, they are lying to you or do not understand American history or the seed of American identity. Now, this is not to say that you cannot be a full American and a Catholic today. America has changed what it means to be American. You know, we used to have slavery back then and everything. But I
also feel like Catholicism is quite different today. And we've talked about this in other episodes where some of the leading Catholic figures are not like Nick Fuentes, because he was raised Catholic, but instead are converts into the religion. And also they're just, I don't know, they're much more pluralistic, and I don't think they are practicing a domineering version of
We will
Catholicism where
get
everyone needs to be
your
it.
thoughts on this in a second. I agree with some of what you say. I don't agree with some of what you say. But let's continue as the history lesson, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Because it's clear that you were never taught this stuff.
No, I really wasn't.
And for me, I always just like when I heard this stuff in the past, it really confused me. It's sort of Catholic American nationalism. Like when I heard this, I was like, surely there must be caveats to this.
Yeah.
They don't actually think America was founded as a Catholic country, do they? And I think going into this can help be like, this is an identity you can have. You can be a Catholic American nationalist, but there are things that you have to grapple with to adopt this identity. And, you know, if you really want to be a Catholic nationalist, you might be better off immigrating to a Catholic majority country, which there are lots of. And we'll talk about why the founding fathers, because the founding fathers were not afraid of Catholicism for no reason. There actually are some theological reasons for this.
Really? Okay.
That make, even in moderate Catholics, it can cause some conflict with American core values that I think even today everyone would argue are American core values. Even Nick Fuentes would argue are American core values. He just hasn't thought through where Catholic theology might have a problem with these values. I mean, he literally probably has. This is the thing that I don't get. He throughout the entire interview, he's talking about how like Jews are loyal to like a separate state that is like antagonistic to us. And I'm like, Nick, like on every issue that you say is important to like America, like the immigration campaign that we're doing and stuff like that, the Vatican has spoken against it, right? Like this is an organization that is actively opposed to most. They even did
I think that's one of the most interesting points. Yeah.
Announcement that we'll get to that seemed directly targeted at Nick Fuentes, basically saying stop doing this stuff. So it's I think his form of Catholicism works because he doesn't actually care. And this is true of a lot of our fans, and I think a lot of the American Catholic nationalists, they don't actually care about the Pope. They don't actually care about service to the central Vatican bureaucracy. But unfortunately, that kind of makes them Protestants who are calling themselves Catholics, which they're like, we'll call ourselves Catholics until the church works itself out again. But we'll talk about this in a second, okay?
Okay.
I'm going back to reading from an article here. It was one I mentioned earlier. Roger Sherman and other members of the Continental Congress wanted to prohibit Catholics from serving in the Continental Army. In 1774, Parliament passed the Quebec Act, taking the enlightened position that the Catholic Church could remain the official church of Quebec. This appalled and terrified many colonists, who assumed this to be a British attempt to subjugate them religiously and by allowing the loathsome Catholics to expand into the colonies. Colonial newspapers railed against the popish threat. The Pennsylvania Gazette said the legislation would now allow, quote, these dogs of hell, end quote, to, quote, erect their heads and triumph within our borders, end quote.
Goodness gracious.
Quite a bit stronger than Nick Fuentes' words on immigration today.
A little bit.
The Boston Evening Post reported that the step was, quote, for the execution of this hellish plan, end quote, to organize 4,000 Canadian Catholics for an attack on America. In Rhode Island, every single issue of the Newport Mercury from October 2nd, 1774 to March 20th, 1775 contained, quote, at least one insidious reference to the Catholic religion of the Canadians, end quote, according to the historian Charles Metzger. They couldn't write a single paper. This is like mainstream. You're getting Fox News of this era. Literally, every newscast is starting with those fucking Catholics. But what I mean is if you weren't taught this, right, you are unaware of how important this was to the mindset of the American Revolutionary and of the founding fathers of this country. And this becomes important. We haven't gotten to like where this matters with all of his Jew stuff, but it will actually be very germane in just a second, okay?
Okay.
In New York, a group marched to the Financial Exchange carrying a huge flag inscribed George III Rex and the liberties of America, no popery. Later that day, a pamphlet that had been distributed urging tolerance towards the Catholics of Canada was smeared with tar and feathers and nailed to the pillory. So let's go into a bit of the history of what it was like to be a Catholic in the American colonies, right? Like, surely these were places of religious freedom. Maryland, founded as a Catholic refugee camp, right? You know, what is this the Catholic colony? They always say that to make you think that it was like, well, you know, in Massachusetts they might have been anti-Catholic, but in Maryland is where the Catholics were, and you know,
yeah, that there was like a place for everyone in the United States. There was a place for Quakers, there was a place for Catholics, there was a place for Protestants, there was a place for Protestants got kicked out by other Protestants, etc.
Actually, what happened was there was a Puritan revolt between 1644 and 1646, after which Catholics were stripped of all rights. Of a number of rights. In 1689, Protestant Association's revolution, Catholic governor and officials were arrested. Public Catholic worship was banned until 1776.
No.
So in the Catholic state, public Catholic worship would get you arrested.
Gosh, okay.
Just making, like, I want to be clear about the scale here, people. Massachusetts Bay and New England, 1647, Massachusetts banned Jesuit priests. Violators faced imprisonment, whipping, or banishment. 1650s, 2 Catholic traders in Boston were briefly jailed and expelled for possessing rosaries and statues. They were jailed not for praying, not for anything else, for possessing rosaries and statues of Christ.
Oh, the nerve.
Or it might have been Mary. Well, that's idolatry.
Yeah.
Root it out. I think we need to go back to these laws. We have been too soft on idolatry. I'm joking, of course. I don't think that we should arrest everyone who practices idolatry. I'm joking again. Of course, they don't see it as idolatry. So when Proto-America did have laws on the book about restricting religious freedoms and stuff like that based on their interpretation of the Bible, and Nick is like, well, we need to go back to that. These were laws that would get you arrested for having a rosary or having iconography of Christ, right? These were laws that were specifically meant to target individuals like Nick. He is actually protected, and Catholics are actually protected by the direction America has gone to not have these type of laws on the books anymore, to not have laws enforcing religious or ideological doctrine. So if we actually ask the questions that Nick claims to ask, but ask them with this historical context in mind, the question we're really asking is, should we go back to a country that arrests people for having any sort of statuette of a god, any sort of picture of a god in their car or in their house? And when I ask this question, I have to say, maybe crime rates would go down. Maybe we would have a more stable democracy. But those are the types of questions that Nick Fuentes at least wants being aired. I mean, you know us. We've gone back to saying, I think the Cromwell laws have merit to them, outlawing music and dancing and theater, and certainly any iconography that would be religious in nature. But I just don't think that those work in a modern context for many side reasons. However, I think the spirit of these sorts of laws is something I can get behind. It's just not what Nick would want. And I can only imagine some of our followers here, again, who may not have a good historical knowledge, might be like, Malcolm, come on, you and Simone aren't even real Christians. You follow some weird version of Christianity that tries to harmonize Calvinist Protestantism with the latest scientific developments and understanding. The founding fathers had no form of Christianity like that in mind. Meanwhile, a historian who's watching them and shares their sentiment is rapidly signaling the cut the mic, because if you're aware of what the founding fathers actually believed, you would be aware that it was exactly that. And if it had been allowed to develop, it likely would have developed in our direction rather than having the early Puritan communities be replaced by Catholic communities through waves of immigrants. But anyway, New York. Okay, New York, right? The city of all types. So in 1700, anti-priest law, Catholic priests faced life imprisonment if caught. At least one, Father John Urry, was executed in 1741. Now, I'd note here that the reason he was executed was because he played part in inciting a slave revolt.
Okay, I mean,
but
yeah.
If you look at the historical documents, most of the panic around it was the fact that he was Catholic.
Oh, that's not the slaves. It's the Catholicism.
Yeah, that was the bigger issue. This is also true.
Lord.
I will put on screen here this image because it was a popular image of the time period. The silversmith and engraver Paul Revere created a cartoon for the Royal American magazine called the Mitred Minute. It depicted 4 contented-looking Mitred Anglican bishops dancing a minette around a copy of the Quebec Act to show the, quote, aberration incontinence of the Roman religion, end quote. Standing nearby are the authors of the Quebec Act with a devil with bat ears and spiky wings hovering behind them, whispering instructions. And you can see another thing here, which I think is kind of funny from a modern context.
Okay.
The British were not even Catholic, but they were Anglican, which smelled kind of like Catholic to the colonists.
Oh, it's still too Catholic derived.
Too Catholic derived. Too high church. It wasn't just, and this is actually like a very important point. The American colonies were not specifically anti-Catholic. They were anti-high church. America was founded as a state, as an anti-high church state. All high church religions that now reside within America, whether it's Anglicanism or Catholicism or anything like that, would have mortified many of the founding fathers and do require some like degree, if you come from one of these traditions, of understanding how you reckon with the motive for the foundation of America and America's evolution, just as, you know, I think a Black person should not, you need to take into account, like, America did have slavery. Like, this was a bad thing that we did. This wasn't just like with Catholics. It wasn't just like the Irish thing, right? It wasn't just anti-Irish. It wasn't just anti-Italian. It goes to the very genesis of the country. And I'll put another political ad here, which is a Romanism. And it's like all of the tendrils, corruption, ignorance, tyranny, superstition.
Wow.
Romanism is a monster with arms of satanic power and strength.
Romanism.
Stretching to the very ends of the earth. The arm of superstition crushing the American child. That of subversion crushing the American flag. So I'm not going to go through the whole.
Goodness gracious. This is just... I mean, yeah, no one's really sharing this stuff.
Yeah, and so today, Catholics make up about 20.8% of the U.S. population.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
You can see our episode, The Great Replacement, already happened, but it basically did. The Puritan faction of America was essentially replaced with the Catholic faction, which had very different voting behavior and was much more progressive up until recently. Recently, Catholics flipped, and overall Catholics vote conservative now, but up until now, Catholics were largely a progressive voting bloc. And we're sort of central to the Progressive Coalition, keep in mind, because they were kind of a minority community that had a lot of discrimination against them. And when RFK won the nomination, everyone was freaking out because they said he'd be loyal to the church. But why the 20% is important to know is you have Nick Fuentes here, guy who comes out and says Jews are a secret cabal that controls, the U.S. government and industry. Various aspects and branches of it, right? And we're going to go into the receipts that he has on this. Jews do have disproportionate positions of power across both government and industry. And he says that they used nepotism to achieve this and secret organizations to achieve this. Here's the problem. The United States is split into 3 branches of government. Okay? If you are an outsider and you're not familiar with this is to prevent one branch of government from ever gaining control. Well, what if I told you that a shadowy religion and secret organization had taken complete control of 1/3 of the United States government? One of these 3 branches. Let's go into the Supreme Court justices right now. Okay? Got John J. Roberts Jr. Was he raised a Catholic? Yes. Is he still a Catholic? Yes. Clarence Thomas. Was he raised a Catholic? Yes. Is he still a Catholic? Yes. Samuel A. Alito Jr. Was he raised a Catholic? Yes. Is he still a Catholic? Yes. Remember that 20% there that the American Catholic population? Sonia Sotomayor. Was she raised a Catholic? Yes. Is she still a Catholic? Yes. Brett Kavanaugh, raised a Catholic? Yes. Still a Catholic? Yes. Amy Coney Barrett, raised a Catholic?
Well,
yes. Still a Catholic? Yes.
Okay.
Hold on. Now we're going to get to the...
What about the JOOs, Malcolm? They're there too.
Only 4 non-Catholics.
Okay.
Amy Coney Barrett. Was she raised a Catholic? Yes. Is she still a Catholic? No. Sorry, not Amy Coney. Neil Gorsuch was raised a Catholic, but now he's an Episcopal. Ellen Kagan is Jewish, and Ketanji Brown Jackson is Protestant. Now, I note here was this addition of the Protestant person onto the Supreme Court. That's a pretty big deal because that's the dominant religion in America. And the last Supreme Court before she was added didn't have a single Protestant on it.
I thought we had more people with Jewish backgrounds on the Supreme Court.
It had 1 extra Jew. So it was 2 Jews, and then everyone else was born into a Catholic family, with one of them being an Episcopal.
Oh, was RBG? She was Jewish or had Jewish background.
Yeah. So Ellen Kagan and Stephen G. Breyer were the last ones. But yeah.
But then Ruth Bader.
So the Supreme Court is controlled. If the Catholics decided to vote in a block, they could control the entire way our state determines, like the United States determines and interacts with laws, right? That's a big deal. And you could say, well, that's just because Catholics are disproportionately in the legal profession. It's not as if there is a secret, there is a secret organization that explicitly put them into this position.
It's not secret.
So let's talk about the Federalist Society.
But it's not secret. It's fine. It's out there. It's doing its thing. It's very public about what it does.
Yeah, so the Federalist
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a...
Yeah, well, I mean, because we can see. So the Federalist Society is an organization that is run by Catholics. Now, they'd say that that's not their motivation, but when you look at the people who they get appointed into judge positions, they are disproportionately Catholics. And you might say, well, that's because Catholics are disproportionately conservative, which is also not true. As I pointed out, historically, Catholics were not overwhelmingly majority. So you had a conservative organization that had a lot of Catholics within it. So let's look at all of these Catholic people who were appointed. John J. Roberts, does he have Federalist Society ties? Yes. Former steering committee member. Clarence Thomas? Yes. Longtime member. Samuel Alito? Yes. Active member. Sonia Sotomayor? No. I think the only one who wasn't. Brett Kavanaugh? Yes. 24 years frequent speaker. Neil Gorsuch? Yes. Member, convention speaker. Amy Coney Barrett? Yes. Affiliate. All of these Catholics who are in the Supreme Court were put there by a giant invitation. I think it's an invitation-only society that does have closed doors meetings, so it's what you would call a secret society that took control of one of our branches of government, which matters a lot when you consider this in the context of America being founded as an anti-high church country, right? Because it is sort of like an active and intentional displacement. Now, am I okay with this? Actually, yes, I'm totally okay with this. I'm okay with it for the same reason I'm okay with Jews favoring in-group stuff. The point being is I think that we all have the right to favor our in-groups, and it's important to investigate how in-group favoritism is working and who is actually a better ally given your values and your long-term goals for America's future. But I think to just throw out there Jews have taken control of things and used invitation-only organizations to do this is a bit calling the kettle black, because Jews control nothing as powerful as the Supreme Court. Just for context here. Now to continue. And you bet your bottom effing dollar, if the Jews did control the Supreme Court, people would be freaking the F out. And why am I okay with Catholics controlling the Supreme Court? Because the Catholics, largely speaking, other than Fuentes, uphold sort of their side of the right alliance, which is to say, I understand that my values are different from the values of your average right-wing individual in America, and therefore I won't impose them on people so we can work together in a coalition, which is something I know. I know that all of my values aren't held by all right-wing people, so I do not attempt to impose those values. I try to work where our values overlap, like, restricting the age at which you can get an abortion, for example, right? Like, I think that's a good thing. We agree on that. Let's work on that. Restricting government censorship, making government smaller, removing government corruption, removing alphabet soup stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, then Nick goes into all of the money we give the Jews. which normally is about 3.8 billion in aid to Israel in a given year. Oh, all of this enormous money we give to the Jews. Do you know how many, on average, we give to Catholic majority countries every year?
Oh.
3.2 billion. About what we give to Israel every year. But do you
know
what,
but that's spread across a bunch of Catholic.
Hold on. It's not actually. Most of it's in the Caribbean. But here's where it gets spicy. The money that we give the Jews, the 3.8 billion, almost all of it has to be spent on American goods.
Yeah.
i.e. American weapons, American business. It's basically just coming right back to the United States.
Yeah.
The 3.2 billion we give to Catholic majority countries, that stays in those countries.
Really?
That
so it's not
have to come back to the United States.
Oh, interesting.
So at the end of the day, America is losing way more money on Catholic majority countries than we are losing on Jewish majority countries.
Wow, that's a very you pose interesting questions when you look at these things. I really appreciate that you do this.
I will note that last year we did up the Israel amount to 14.3 billion, but this is still like not a lot when you consider it against things like the amount we're giving to Ukraine and stuff like that. To word it another way, we have to pay $60 to $70 billion annually for many years to deal with the situation in the Ukraine. With Israel, it was a one-time additional payment of 14.3 billion. And this is the thing when he's like, oh, Israel is just a liability. I'm like, Israel fights their own effing wars. They're not a liability. Ukraine was a liability, right? I've seen in real time what a country that's a liability looks like. You know, Israel, ends its wars and wins its wars. And all it needs is a 1-year payment. We only increased the amount we were giving them for 1 year. And this year, the amount that we sent them was only 500 million more than normal, which just isn't that much when you contrast it to these other numbers. So they're not as much of a liability as you would pretend they are. Now I'm going to go into the next part because I think that this is sort of the core of this. And this gets to the point that you're talking about with, a lot of our fans who are Catholics or Nick Fuentes may not see himself as fundamentally subservient to the Vatican or as like an agent within America trying to turn America into a vassal state of the Vatican.
Or they're just, at least where they are focused is on building strong Catholic communities in the United States. And it's not.
Right. And we support my number one top candidate for the leader of my party in the next election cycle is a Catholic. Okay?
Yeah, JD Vance. Right? Absolutely. Yeah.
I am all in on JD Vance. But my point, so I'm not like anti-Catholic or something like that, it's not that but I think that there are things that we need to sort of talk about as a wider movement. Okay. So Catholicism is both a religion and a governance system. One with its own country, mind you. If you say I'm Catholic only in a religious sense, but I reject the governance system, i.e. I reject the Pope and the cardinals and apostolic succession.
Okay.
You are, in fact, just like claiming to be a Catholic while definitionally not being a Catholic.
I don't know, because also I feel like the Catholics that we know who also aren't very Vatican oriented, who are much more grassroots oriented, represent the future of Catholicism.
I think if you look at what's happening in the Vatican, we have not seen a shift more conservative with this Pope, which a lot of people
No, we've not. No, but I just see that as an additional level of divorce from this level.
Remember during the Revolution, the groups that they were afraid of, the groups that they were mad about was two groups, the Anglicans and the Catholics. Okay. Yeah. So you might not know this, but over the past few weeks, the Anglican Church has split into two churches.
I didn't know this until you told me this morning. This is insane.
Yeah. Why did it split into two churches? It split into two churches because the next version of what for them is essentially their Pope is going to be a woman. And a lot of the churches didn't like that. And the reality is what it looks to an outsider is happening with Catholicism is the actual central structure of the church is moving further and further, captured by the urban monoculture. And a lot of the on-the-ground Catholics just sort of believe God will guide it back to where it originally was and where it needs to be in alignment with Scripture, right? And a lot of Anglicans thought that was going to happen with their religion as well. But the point I'm making here is even if you take this position, definitionally, you're either like pseudo admitting to yourself that you're not actually a Catholic, right? Like that you have separated from the apostolic succession, from the Vatican, from the bureaucracy, or you're sort of like an abstentia Catholic in Catholic community, waiting for the Vatican to become sane again. And this is what I would call sort of a soft secessionist, right? Like
that's what I think we have mostly in the strongest Catholic communities in the United States.
Yes.
Like they're leveraging the resources that they get from their parishes and their local bishops and even from higher levels, but they also are like, yeah, but
Simone, this matters as I'm going to begin to lay out the rest of this, right? Okay. Because it actually really matters if you think about where the party is going to go, where the conservative alliance goes, and where cultural alliances between groups like this and groups like us, we're the schismatics and because they don't see themselves as schismatic, but they really are kind of soft schismatics. And I'm going to continue here. So I'm going to be honest here. I think a lot of our followers who are Catholic and even Nick fall into this category. But what I mean, if you are a real Catholic and follow the logic of that theology, is that the logical conclusion, and this is very important. So suppose you are an actual Catholic, like you follow the actual doctrine, and I don't mean like one branch. I mean literally any mainstream branch of Catholics, they hold on to this belief. The goal is to one day convert everyone on earth, or not everyone, but hopefully the majority of people on earth, into Catholics, make every country a Catholic majority country. I'm sure Nick would say that is the long-term goal. And then by extension, every country is subordinate to, because presumably the Vatican sorts itself out. It shakes off all of this liberalism. It becomes the way it's supposed to be again. A central governing body of technocrats that has its own country and controls every other country on earth, sort of like vassal states. Basically, it's recreating a theological version of the UN. To be a Catholic integralist, which I think is a religious mandate if you actually take Catholicism at face value, to say we do eventually want to convert everyone, and I do not want to change the papal system, right, is to say eventually we convert everyone and then everyone is subordinate to Rome. Well, the problem here being is, one, it's the ultimate globalist position. It's sort of like the maximalist globalist position, which is, if you are familiar with the rest of my ideology or Simone's ideology, you would understand why that's so horrifying to us. And I think that some of the Catholics can feel like, why are they so, like, do they hairs go up when we're talking about Catholic stuff? And it's because a lot of them just ignore that this is the end goal. But if you look at Simone and I, and you look at how we view the world, we're always thinking in terms of end goals, like 500 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 1,000,000 years into the future. Where do we want humanity to be? And so if we're always seeing things 1,000 years out or 500 years out or something like that, we're going to be very aware of what is the active end goal of different groups, even if it's not what they're fighting for in the moment. And the theological, I'm not talking about political, the theological end goal is to essentially transform the earth into like a global theological UN, but operating under God, right? And that's not an evil plan or anything like that. I can see why somebody would think that that was a good thing to do, but it goes against not just our theological leanings, but our political leanings, because I am a nationalist. I am an anti-globalist. And I think that this, and people will note here, they're like, well, what about other groups? Because there's other groups in the Conservative Alliance, and a lot of religious groups have this as their end state. Right? Like Mormons eventually want to convert everyone on earth to Mormonism. And eventually that would mean that all governments would be subordinate to the Mormon Central Church in Utah. But here is where it gets a little more nuanced. It's not the same for every religion, right? So a Mormon who wants to do that can be an American nationalist in a way that a Catholic cannot be a real American nationalist if they admit this long-term plan of Catholicism, which is to say that the Central Church of Mormonism is in America already. So they benefit, their long-term plan benefits from disproportionately benefiting America on the world stage and empowering America within the world stage.
Whereas the Vatican is not exactly going to benefit from making America rise.
Yes, the Vatican isn't anything, and we'll actually go over. It has been a long time direct enemy of American interests.
I've only heard of criticisms of American policy coming from Vatican City, to be fair.
Yes. It's not awesome. They are one of America's core sort of political, as a political axis, one of our core enemies, which makes them very different from like Israel. Israel will do stuff like spy on us or sell technology or something like that, but it's always out of self-interest. It's not in an active attempt to sabotage us for the sake of sabotaging us. It's to advance to their own goals.
Well, no. I think a better way of putting that is their self-interest doesn't involve sabotaging or knocking us down, whereas perhaps there are reasons why the Catholic Church would benefit from that.
Yes.
Everyone acts with self-interest involved.
Yeah, everyone acts with self-interest. I don't mind that Israel occasionally acts with self-interest.
It only acts with self-interest. Everyone only acts with self-interest.
No. You're missing my point here, Simone. When Israel does something to sabotage the US's political interests, it is because they were able to gain some benefit from that action. The Vatican will, and we'll go into instances of this, sabotage America's interests with no benefit to them. For the sake, because they see America as an existential enemy of theirs.
Yes, the benefit to them is knocking them down. If knocking us down,
because we're an enemy. But Israel doesn't see us that way. I'm pointing this out. This is a very big difference in the relationship.
There's greater alignment between the long-term goals of Israel and the United States than there are between the Vatican and the United States.
But we'll get to that in a second. But with Catholics, for example, I do think you could be a Catholic nationalist and like an Italian, because I think that Italy's interests are really aligned with the Vatican's interests, and you could, you're advancing Italy's interests, you're advancing Catholic's interests. Now you may ask, with all this being the case, why do I so readily ally with Catholic factions within the wider, sort of, whether it's the pro-natalist coalition? Why do I try to offer advice on how things can be fixed? Why do I work to alert them to their own low birth rates and everything like that? There are a number of reasons. As I said, one, everything that we could win a campaign on right now, I am broadly aligned with Catholics on. If you tried to ban, for example, IVF in the United States, you probably would not win a presidential election.
Right.
And so there's no reason for them to advocate for that. Right. If you tried to, make a super soldier program like I would want to, you're not going to win a US election, right? So but it's not just that, because I'm not just aligning with Catholics. I'm actively trying to make the Catholic movement more healthy. When I'm like, here is social technology you can use. Here's a way you could start in order to address this. Here's, you have low fertility rates here, and here. Here's how I'd address it if I within your community. Why am I trying to make someone that is existentially at a head with my goals? We believe that humans have a mandate to intergenerationally improve. And so this means that we believe in engaging with genetic science, like genetic alteration of humans, engaging with brain-computer interface, the merging of humans with AI, everything like that, right? Like artificial wombs, all of this stuff that, because Catholics believe in the sanctity of the body, Catholics are actively against and would actively attempt to oppose. So somebody could act, which I note here, Jews are not actively against. Like if you're like, why do we so readily align with Jews? Where I was like, Mormons eventually want everyone to be Mormon. So even if we align in the short term, we're going to have problems in the long term, right? Also, Mormons don't oppose any of this technology. Like Mormons are okay with all this, which is one of the reasons why, even if Mormons became like the dominant faction in the United States, they'd still be they wouldn't attempt to strip us of things that we need to achieve our theological mandates. If Jews became the dominant faction in the United States, they would not attempt to strip us of things we need to achieve our theological mandates. If Catholics did, they absolutely would. In most Catholic majority countries, we wouldn't have a single child because IVF is functionally banned. They make you do the transfers immediately. This is in most Catholic Europe majority countries. And it's, I wouldn't have a single kid. My line doesn't exist, right? So the point I'm making here is, so why do we so try to help them and readily ally with them? And the real reason is Because they're kind of on the back foot. If they were doing as well as the Jews, I might have a more concern about them. But the reality is they have desperately low fertility rates. Catholic majority countries, like 1.18 in like Italy, 1.5. No, it's 1.15 in Spain.
Not
all across
good.
Latin America, we have rates around 1.1, 1.2 now. Catholics are kind of going extinct. In the United States, they have low fertility rates. We're just seeing very, very low Catholic fertility rates outside of one community, which is Hispanic immigrants in the United States have a relatively decent fertility rate, but it doesn't offset the rest of the Catholic fertility rate. And because they have such a low fertility rate, and not just a low fertility rate, but a low fertility rate combined with a lack of economic relevance, most Catholic majority countries, and this is just a thing, like when Nick Fuentes might say something like, I don't want our country to become a Muslim majority country because Muslim majority countries, are poor and corrupt. But you're dealing with the same thing from my perspective. I just think he lacks the external framing. If you're not a Catholic and you look around the world at Catholic majority countries, every single one of them is poor and corrupt, with the possible exception of Ireland, which is in a downward spiral right now. So
I think that primarily it's the tax incentives with large corporations that's been propping it up, right? So kind of.
Yeah. So this is why when I think about like long-term partners, right, like for my ideological framework, my religious framework, we can be a movement. We can all sit down and be like, hey, like, and even our Catholic followers, they're not hiding this from us. They know, we know, and they know they don't want us to have a family that grows really large and popularizes the use of germline gene editing in humans. They don't want us.
Well, I think Catholics would prefer that to polygenic risk score selection because you have fewer embryos.
I thought this as well, and I was talking to a reporter in Telemundo, and she's like, they absolutely would not.
Oh, really?
Even though ideologically they see one as like murder, they still see the second as worse because they see it as so violating of the human condition. And this is because the root of our individual conservative ideologies comes from two different places. Their conservative ideology's root is wanting to go back to a more traditional way of doing things, whereas our conservative root is very Nietzschean. It is the strong should beat the weak. We need to continue to become stronger. And if there is a technology that allows us to counter the dysgenic trends within our population, or in some way strengthen our population relative to other populations, we have a mandate to engage with that. We understand where their position comes from, and I think they understand where our position comes from, and they're both parts of the wider conservative ideology. And so our Catholic fans, like, none of our Catholic fans are surprised by this. Like, this isn't me like being, I'm mad at Catholic. Our Catholic fans are like, yeah, I don't like that you guys do this stuff and this stuff and this stuff.
Well, that's one of the great things about our podcast is that the people who listen to this podcast are not like our ideological mirrors. They are very different people.
And I love that.
Yeah,
and I think that's why, and they can sit and they can be like, but honestly, we are at a political fulcrum point in terms of human history, and we cannot risk losing an election. Like the fact that Nick Fuentes didn't even vote in the last election cycle, to me is really telling of where his heart lies, that, babies are being murdered by his standards, and he couldn't bring himself to ally with the mainstream conservative party over this, over what is really pretty aesthetic differences. But we'll get into that in a second. So I want to go into some of the quotes from the interview that I thought were really interesting. He said, I think we are required to love our wives. I think you have to love our wives as our wives. So he's talking about the way he sees women and everything like that. But he also talked about, why he doesn't have a wife yet. Really what I took away from this, he says, he basically tried to say that all women will destroy your life. All women will make you unhappy. And of course, on the other side here, what was his name?
It's not like a big portion of our audience wouldn't agree with him.
With Tucker Carlson was like, no. But all women might ruin. One of the problems was the Groyper movement more broadly. Mm-hmm. And Nick has talked about this, and it's one of the reasons apparently he doesn't get a wife is because he has found that when people in the movement marry out, and note here, I have no animosity about Nick Fuentes. He seems like a perfectly nice guy. I can be like, our goals are run cross-function to his goals long-term, but I think he could be a very valuable player in the conservative alliance if he would stop stabbing us in the back by telling people not to vote during critical election cycles. Like if Kamala had won, what would be happening in American media right now? You know, what would be happening with the American legal system right now, with the school system, like in Gaza even, right? Like so many horrible things would have happened. And it just seems like such a petty, but not to get to that, because I've already had episodes where I go off on that. If you have a movement where you have a fear of marrying because you think you will leave the movement if you do that, and you have a fear of your followers marrying because it has frequently caused them to leave the movement, then this is not a movement that is cohesive with intergenerational stability, right? Like it's not a movement that's going to matter in 50 years because they're not going to reproduce.
Yeah.
And Nick actually is well aware of this, which I like. You know, he's a smart guy, right? He thinks that if they can make enough of an Overton window shift now with like the 10 years of relevance they might have, you know, that he can move American conservatism, the breeders, more towards his perspectives. Can he achieve this? I think he has achieved it to a small extent, you know, through getting on the Tucker Carlson show, everything like that, airing out the things that he's airing out, which will go into a lot of the things he said about Israel. But I don't know if he'll achieve it. I don't see it being possible long run because it's just not a long-term plan. Mm-hmm. It's a short-term plan that seems incompatible with procreation if people who get married leave it, if it can't appeal to women, right? And he said here, I don't know a happy woman that's a liberal. Then and Tucker Carlson was saying, I don't know a happy married woman who's not a conservative. Sort of pointing out that if you marry a woman and you make her happy, she'll become conservative, right? Like you did. You were very progressive when I met you. Yeah. Another one here that he said that I thought was pretty rich. They have an international community across borders, extremely organized. Like no other community is like that. And I'm like, except for the Catholics, you guys literally have the Federalist Society. You literally took over a branch of the US government. The Jews have not achieved that, you know, but I think it's a bit of it's hard to see this stuff when you're inside the house than when you're outside the house, and the house is so obvious looking, right? And I think that this is also when people are like, well, the Jews are a group that's different from you and has cross interest to you. And I'm like, so are the Catholics, right? Like we are a small group. The Techno-Puritans, my family's traditions, like these pro-tech people, we are the last descendants of Puritan logic in America. We are a very small faction, right? We need to build alliances with groups that are not us, while being aware that these other groups will only build alliances with us if they're self-serving, right? This is as true for Catholics as it is for Jews. He says Jews want to protect Israel. He said a number of times, the enemy is the conservative movement. And he actively sees mainstream conservatism as a bigger enemy than wokeism and stuff like this. And I wasn't sure if this is just like my prejudice of him that was leading me to believe that he was actively attempting to sabotage the United States conservative movement. And he made it very clear that, no, this is an active choice on his part, which does mean that if you are a member of the conservative movement in the United States, and this is why it's like, don't attack conservatives that are to the right of you. It's like, I agree with that. If they haven't made the mainstream conservative movement their active and stated enemy, that's where it gets a little different. When their goal is to prevent us from winning election cycles and killing babies, right? From their perspective. Well, and from our perspective. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to now go over like what the Vatican is actually doing, what its ideology actually is, because I think that this is important to contrast with Nick's ideology here, because I think what we can see is his worldview sort of only works as long as you forget that the thing that makes Catholics different from Protestants is apostolic succession and the Vatican and the central bureaucracy, at least some branch of the Protestantism, not every branch of Protestantism. Okay, so plenary indulgence for World Youth Day Eco-Participation 2023. Attending Lisbon's World Youth Day, a Vatican event, got indulgences, could earn a plenary indulgence by joining Cry of the Earth, an ecological initiative.
What?
They are now giving indulgences for environmentalist work.
That makes sense, actually. I mean, like, given how the church has evolved over time, that it has become much more progressive and that they still have indulgences, that checks out. That would be happening.
That it is no longer possible to doubt that the human anthropic origin of climate change. and that this, affects everyone on Earth, et cetera, et cetera. Francis warns of extreme climate change at risk from CO2s, and they have been extremely adamant, and this is a big problem for Italy, at bringing in refugees, and extremely critical of Trump's refugee policy. We ourselves see the migrants and refugees do not only represent a problem to be solved, but our brothers and sisters to be welcome, respected, and loved. So, and they've pushed for personal invitations of migrants into Italy. They have called Trump's policy a disgrace. They have attacked Trump during his first election cycle as well. A person who thinks only about building walls wherever they may be and not building bridges is not a Christian.
Okay.
And I note here, a fun one here is, because now we're going to go over what Nick would actually say and some quotes from Nick.
Okay.
But they're like, Jews want to take over the world and force their no-hide laws on us. And I'm like, bro, one, Jews already disproportionately outcompete other people within systems.
What are no-hide laws? Sorry.
No-hide laws, we've done another episode pointing out that they're basically a scam and not real, and some modern Jews made it up, and it's a very long video. We're not always positive to Jewish people, mind you. In that episode, we argue that Judaism
contrary to what everyone in our comments argues.
And Christianity is very obviously the correct successor to the ancient Christian religion, which is only called Judaism now because of, I don't want to go into this in this video, but the point being is we are critical of Judaism as well. But the funny thing is that the no-hide laws don't actually impose any additional restrictions on somebody who is already a Catholic or a Christian. Literally no additional restrictions. Whereas if Catholics controlled everything, they would impose tons of additional restrictions on everyone else, which is, again, why if you're choosing a faction to ally with. So here's a quote from him. F the UN and internet and democracy. You know what democracy has given us? Obesity, low rates of literacy. It's given us divorce, abortion, gay marriage, liberalism, pornography. That's what democracy has given us. Ghettos and crime and political correctness. Diversity, yeah, the track record of democracy, not so good. Catholic autocracy, pretty strong record. Catholic monarchy, and just war and crusades and inquisition, pretty good stuff. The thing here is, I think actually, if you look at the history of a lot of the Catholic monarchies, there was an extreme amount of poverty within them. They did effectively organize during specific periods, but generally speaking, I might even say it might be worth trying it again, because it does appear to me that, for the reasons we cited above, Catholicism may be like true, like I'm gonna go balls to the wall with my Catholicism, might be incompatible with democracy. And that might be why there's so much corruption in Catholic majority states, right? It might be that democracy is more like of a Protestant Jewish thing. And I'm not saying this is like a attack on different groups are different things work for them, right? Look at our video on Arabs. Like, Arabs almost never have democracies, and when they do, it usually ends in a horrible, corrupt disaster. So, the Catholics may be the same way, right? I don't know, right? We haven't seen it tried recently, but I don't disagree with this. But what I would say is, then why don't you go back to a Catholic majority country, right? Like, why don't you go back to a country where the culture of that country is your culture?
Right.
Your culture is not my culture. Your culture is not the culture of America. Your culture is not the culture of America at its founding. It's not the culture of America today. And there are plenty of countries on earth that have your culture, right? Like, why do you need to be here? Like, the very arguments that he uses against immigration, I feel about him. It's like, you haven't integrated, you haven't assimilated, you don't seem to understand American values. Why can't you go to one of the countries that share your value system rather than our value system? Right?
All right. So let me take a crack here, though. As someone who, like, I don't know what it was about the Nick fangirl deep dive, right? But like, now I'm quite fond, and not that I wasn't not fond of him before, I was just completely ignorant, but like, I'm like, oh, Nick Fuentes, like, there's a fondness there that wasn't there before. On top of that, some of our favorite people in the world are Catholic. I mean, Catherine Ruth Bucolic she's Catholic. Roger Seferino of Heritage is Catholic. A bunch of other people that we know that we're not going to name for their privacy are Catholic, and they represent, to me, in my view, a sort of new guard of Catholicism. And yes, we've already kind of aired this a little bit earlier in the episode, but I kind of am like, you know what? I'm all for a sort of revisionist history Catholicism that is America first and American nationalist Catholicism that is kind of like, hey, we're playing the long game. We're going to inherit the future of the Catholic Church. A lot of the people who follow this podcast, who are also Catholic, regularly send to us episode ideas on a corruption within the Catholic Church of like, here are these people who've been trying to push it to a progressive end. Here's this corruption. Here's this thing. They're actively critical of the Vatican. They're anything but blindly loyal to the Vatican. And I take a lot of comfort personally in knowing that on a grassroots level, they're building something that I think, honestly, on a community level, is more organized and working better than the vast majority of technophilic religions. I would say maybe even more so than Orthodox Jews in the United States, because while Orthodox Jews have really strong local communities, they're also a little bit more technophobic in some circles. Like they seem a little bit too insular and not that integrated with the wider world.
I agree with all this, but as I laid out, basically what these groups are doing is they're moving into a soft schismatic position while they hope the Vatican gets its butt together.
Well, I think you don't have to hope for the Vatican to get its act together. I think you just have to wait it out.
That's what the Anglicans did, and now they've got a lady pope.
Right, but I think that's on the tail end. I mean, look at where the UK is in general right now.
Look at where Italy is in general.
Yeah, but like, no, what I'm saying is the UK hasn't got its act together. The UK isn't enjoying the dividends of a long-term demographic shift that would be downstream of what I expect from the Catholic community. What the UK now has is, similarly reflected in its current status with immigration and policy and censorship. And we had that episode on how basically the UK is being occupied by a hostile anti-British force now. And it's sort of this form of like wokeism that's really creepy. So of course I would expect the Anglican Church to be like this. What I'm looking at is the long game of what Catholicism in the United States is now, which is something that we would probably be pretty happy with and think is positive. So I don't think that's a good argument.
I agree with all of that. And that's why we ally with them so readily and frequently. But I also think it's important for groups to not be sitting there and each thinking to themselves, well, I know in 200 or 300 years, either we're going to have to convert you or there's going to be trouble, right? Like, and I think that it's more honest as a movement if we share that I am aware that our long-term plans and your long-term plans are theologically incompatible. And then you can talk about how do you make that work? For example, the techno-Puritans and the other groups like us could just leave Earth, right? Mm. I don't need to, I don't have any special attachment to this planet. Catholics do. They can convert all the humans on Earth and feel great about themselves, right? There are ways that we can, by having the conversation and admitting that on paper, it looks like one day we will be directly in conflict with each other, that it's important to err and bring that up, even if right now their communities and our communities, like I feel much more comfortable with our kids socializing within their communities than within the urban monoculture. So like clearly I see them as cultural allies in the moment. And I think that some people can think it's cool to dunk on a group just because they know that they're going to be cultural enemies in the future. And what I'm trying to do here is not do that. Say, look, we are, like, even when I read Nick's whole thing about democracy not working and Catholic monarchy, I was like, yeah, like that's a decent point, right? And I'm going to split this episode into 2 episodes, actually. The second one is going to be when we go over Jews versus Catholics, who to side with, because that'll be a fun one. And that's where we can go over all of his questions about Judaism and like, is Judaism a problem in the amount of ties Israel has in the United States? Because it is a lot. Mm-hmm. There are concessions for that relationship. But I'd also note here, Simone, that it's important to remember that like just how boned Catholicism looks like it's going to be. Like even these factions of Catholicism, if you look at current rates of sperm decline, I think it's by 2045, 50% of men in the developed world are going to be infertile. And this number is going to keep going on, right? Like it's if you do not use reproductive technology, which many the mainstream position in Catholicism is do not use it, you're going to really struggle to keep those numbers up. And they're already struggling. Like I hear what you're saying.
But I also, I mean, there is something to be said for the fact that an anti-IVF policy could change and likely will change in the future.
But
it's not set in stone. And one of the nice things about the Catholic Church is leadership is able to change things like this.
Is in timelines where the Catholic Church survives and the good ones don't go schismatic, is a future in which the church severely changes.
And it is completely capable of doing that.
The problem here being is that the ones who are having the most kids want it to change the least. Okay. So Nick Fuentes has talked about wanting a Catholic government. He's talking about America is a Christian nation, not a Judeo-Christian nation. This was one of the expos, which I absolutely love in the light of the Catholic history of America. He said once, you are with the Catholic or you're with the Jews, which, we will get to. I can see that. The supreme leader, totalitarian Christian dictator, he has liked the idea of banning a bunch of stuff, replacing our current country with a Catholic Taliban. And you can see why when we hear these sorts of things,
you mean a Catholic caliphate, basically.
A Catholic, I think he said Taliban actually, but
he actually said Taliban. Oh my God.
So and he complains a lot about, like, I've tried to figure out what his long-term vision of, like, does he understand that the consequence of his worldview is everybody being under a Catholic super state out of the Vatican, sort of a global technocracy? And doesn't seem to grapple with that. He seems to stop at, let's remove Jewish influence, let's increase Catholic influence.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why it would be so fun to have him on the podcast and talk about these things. Because one, I want to confirm if that's actually his stance, but two, as we've seen just in so much empirical data, when you try from a top-down level to enforce these policies, and you can look at anything from Arya Baba's research, which is more weak correlations, to like places such as Iran, where people are just actively fighting back against the morality police and stuff. It doesn't work. That this needs to come from within. This has to come from devout commitment to your religious values, not because the morality police are going to come and arrest you if you are acting against religious tenets. So yeah, I mean, if only we could talk with him. I know that we in an earlier time would have talked with us, but he's really trending now. And I also think that that's just on its own really interesting. I feel like he started to trend first when Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson kind of lambasted him in their own one-on-one chat. But he keeps trending up in the media. He keeps making the front page of Drudge. And there's something going on there. I don't know if it's that it just his rise or orchestrated rise fits into a certain narrative that people really want.
I think it's progressives are using him to attack the conservative movement.
He does seem like a cudgel, and like he's being, that there are people uninvolved with him that are trying to put him into place and like insert him into narratives. Like, recall that
this is what
Groypers were accused of being responsible for the Charlie Kirk assassination.
Yeah, so you've got to be aware of the larger political play here, okay?
Okay.
The conservatives have done a very good job of allying with the Jews, right? And it's useful to ally with the Jews. There's a lot of reasons why it's useful to ally with the Jews. In terms of all over the world, they have disproportionate positions of power within governments, within country, and within business. If they think that the US's success is going to benefit them, in whether it's Israel or Judaism, moreover, they have a vested interest in the US's success. Mm-hmm. So there is this idea of there's no reason to side with the Jews. And I want to be clear here. It's not that I, quote unquote, trust the Jews or Israel. It's that I trust the Jews and Israel to act in their best interest. The thing is I can find a path where that best interest correlates with my best interest. I find it harder to find a path where the Vatican's best interest correlates with my best interest, at least when I look at what the Vatican is putting out right now in terms of public statements. And the great thing is progressives always turn against the Jews, because progressives believe that all differences between groups and communities can't be downstream of genetics, can't be downstream of culture. They must be downstream of what? systemic unfairness, right? And so if Jews are in positions of power, Jews must have cheated, right? This is why the whole Black Lives Matter thing, everything like that. And so they turned against Jews, and the right has been able to absorb the Jewish movement to a large extent in the United States, which is very important. And we've been able to cut off a lot of donations that were going to left-wing causes and stuff like that from Jews. And the left desperately needs to try to convince American Jews and the American public that there are still right-wing anti-Semites out there. And about the only one left is Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens.
But we just have Ben Shapiro to blame for all that.
Yes,
really wild.
Ben Shapiro minting anti-Semites.
Because they were fine before. They were fine with Jews.
Okay, so we're going to cut off here. And the next episode, we're going to go into Nick's accusations about Israel, which are mostly accurate, by the way, and why, despite them being accurate, they are generally less inflammatory than if it was the Vatican. Like almost any complaint he has about Israel, the Vatican has done worse. And this is where it gets to the thing of like, when he's like, it's either Catholics or the Jews, somebody who isn't actively a Catholic, you know, your answer is going to be pretty obvious. And there's a reason why for the Conservative Party, they have tried to ally with the Jews. All right. So next episode beginning. When I run out of lemonade, we should be storing them all somewhere. Are we keeping them all in one place?
Yeah, they're all in a basket with other toys.
Okay, good.
Because
I'll whip those out this weekend along with the bouncy things.
There will be battles.
That's the point of children, right? If you're not going to battle them, I watched enough shows of the kids to know that when you have little things in your house, you have to battle them. And so I battle my children.
Yeah, this is necessary.
And that is probably why we had CPS coming over to our house again.
Once again.
Not for battling, because my kid made finger guns at someone at school.
Yeah, so they had to make sure all of our actual guns were locked up because clearly that's his next step. You know, finger guns are just the gateway to guns. Although, I mean, keep in mind, there's this very prominent lawsuit that I think either is about to be decided or that's finally going into court, which is about that first grader who shot his teacher. And Octavian's a first grader. So I think, you know, yeah.
All right.
Oh, 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 oh. I grabbed my old phone, dialed my side with glee. Got a story about Ben that's wild as can be. He sees young Nick Fuentes, a college kid bright, with opinions so mild, not spoiling for a fight. But Ben unleashes hell, unprovoked and so mean, smears him as racist for views in between, fires him from gigs while he's still in his dorm, turns a normal young guy into anti-Semitic storm. Oh Ben, you're so hateful, prejudice in your veins, pushing good folks to madness, driving them insane. From questions on hate to full-blown hateful spite, the Jews would be better without your dark light. Oh, 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 your dark light. Oh, 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 oh. Then Candace Owens joins all pro-Israel cheer, but Ben starts the war, fills her heart up with fear. Hey! Harasses over Gaza, calls her names in the fray, fires her from Daily Wire, sends her anti-Semitic way. She flips to the shadows with tropes old and grim, blames secret cabals all because of him. His constant attacks like a thorn in the side create more division with nowhere to hide. to know. With jabs uninvited and a soul full of ire, he's the prejudice king, setting the world on